Okay, welcome to this week's Nechama Leibovich's commentary on the Parsha, on Parsha Chayei Sarah. Over the last 2 weeks, I've been struggling to pick which topic. Her Gilyo note are so prolific. There are so many choices of topic. In the book that I have that we often look at, the essays, there are so many different topics. It's so lucky. I was just joking to Judith, like in Vayikra, I think it'll be harder to find interesting topics, but in Bereshit, we have so many. And I was really drawn to the topic of this essay, which is called Praying to God for Luck. And so before we delve in, I wanted to explain my feelings about it. Some of you may know that I'm very interested in what like psychologists call magical thinking, right? Which is the idea that something that you do that is not related to an action will affect the outcome of that action. So a good example is wearing lucky socks to tests, right? So psychologists say, of course, if you don't study or show up to class and you wear lucky socks, it's unlikely to affect your outcome. But if you do the work and you wear the lucky socks, people often perform even better than were they not wearing their lucky socks. And that's because the magical thinking that this action of wearing lucky socks affects your test scores gives you a confidence that you don't have without that action. And so I think it's interesting, for example, tashlich, around the Yamim Tovim. I think there are a lot of good examples. Why go to tashlich? You would be better off, I think, doing teshuva at home, davening more, going to mincha, whatever it is, instead of schmoozing at the lake and throwing breadcrumbs in. But I think that if you do the work anyway of teshuva and davening during the Yamim Noraim, that sense of control over your life is very powerful. That action of saying, like, I'm throwing away the sins. And so I really like magical thinking. I think it's a great tool. And I don't think they had that term when Nechama Leibovitz wrote her essay, and I'm not sure she would agree with me. But I think there's something to it. I think I've been reflecting over our first few weeks and thinking that I'm searching for a connection with Nechama Leibovitz. I was not blessed, as some have been here, to learn directly with her. And I want her to come off the page a little bit for me. And so I often think, the question we ask, what's bothering Rashi? I try to think, like, what's bothering Nechama? What made her write an essay on this particular topic? And so I think that this question about magical thinking is more prevalent in difficult times than in easy times, right? When you're just turning your hat inside out at a baseball game, that's like pretty low stakes. But when you think like, oh, if I don't drive to work the same route every week, my son might die in battle in Israel, that's much higher stakes of magical thinking, right? And so I imagine, I don't know, it's very hard to figure out the date of the essays in this book, but I imagine it could have been written in a difficult time in Israel, 48, 67, 73, right? There's no shortage of hard days in which Nechama wrote these beautiful essays. And so in some way, I think choosing this topic, whether we all agree with her or not at the end, felt like a way of sort of crossing that time divide. And thinking about what it means to want to feel like we have some control over our outcomes. So with that lengthy introduction, I will share our source sheet here. And say that on the surface, I think what is bothering Nechama Leibovitz is very obvious. This is pages 239 to 243 from her book. I did not bring us a Gilyon because this is a pretty lengthy essay, and I could not find one that matched our topic. So oops, I did it again. I'm sorry for anyone who printed. I forgot to transform our divine names. In this week's Parsha, Avraham's Eved, the servant of Avraham, goes looking for a wife for Rivka, right? He's charged by Avraham in this way. And he says, while he's waiting for the perfect wife to arrive, he offers a brief tefillah to God, right? He says, Vayomer Hashem Elokei Adoni Avraham. Oh God, right? Hakre na lefanai hayom, which is translated in Sefaria as grant me good fortune. Nechama Leibovitz translates it as send me good chance. So I put that in here because this is the phrase of note. Va'aseh chesed im Adoni Abraham, and deal graciously with my master Abraham. So just a reminder, all of the non-indented text is that of Nechama Leibovitz. And she writes, this plea of Eliezer, Abraham's servant, poses a problem. This is surely a self-contradiction in him praying to God to engineer a coincidence. This is the literal rendering of his plea, which may be translated as cause to chance before me today, right? So I hear what she's saying. There feels like there's a stira, a contradiction here. If the Eved Abraham is praying to God for help, why does he also feel like he needs good fortune, right? If he believes in God, he shouldn't need good fortune. And if he only believes in good fortune, what's he doing davening, right? I think that's the question. I also, brief side note about our source sheets. As I said in our first class, one of the goals that I think Nechama Leibovitz had when she wrote those Gilyo note was to expose people to sources that are not on the page, so to speak. And so I highlighted our commentaries in orange, and on the third page of the source sheet, I put in fourth page, this was a long one, their dates and their place of origin and like a brief sentence about them and their work. So the Abarbanel is the first person she quotes, a commentary in Italy in the late 1400s, early 1500s. I think it's super interesting that these really early commentaries are also philosophers and financiers and poets and grammarians, right? Like a lot of jobs. And then as they get newer, they become focused on their scholarship almost entirely. So the Abarbanel, she quotes the Abarbanel right off the bat here. And he formulates the problem. If the servant relied on divine providence and for that reason prayed to him, how could he invoke the workings of chance and ask him to engineer a coincidence when these are two mutually exclusive categories? What happens through the workings of providence cannot be termed chance of coincidence. Moreover, it is conceivable for one who believed in divine providence to accept the existence of such a thing as chance, and even go so far as to request the Almighty himself to prepare such a situation. Right, so I don't know if this question resonates for you, but for me, I really feel it. I feel like often I'm one of those deal makers in stressful situations, right? God, if I get there on time, I'll make sure to daven mincha every day this week, right? Like this idea of like asking God to clear traffic feels both to me of like asking for the good coincidence of no traffic and asking for divine intervention. And so I guess I would start by saying I disagree almost entirely with the problem in the sense on the surface that I don't see it as a stira. I don't know if you guys feel this self-contradiction. I think that when good things happen, I often ascribe them to God or to someone else, right? Oh, I guess my dad was really looking out for me that day. I'll say like, because there was no traffic when I left late, for example. I'm often late, often in traffic. But that is certainly the question that is bothering the Abarbanel to start. And she brings here two commentaries, the Ibn Ezra and then Solomon Debno, I believe is how his name is pronounced, commenting on him. So I'm just gonna, I hope I'm not making people dizzy here. The Ibn Ezra, right, is a Spanish commentary from the early 1100s. And is focused on pshat, on grammar. He is a grammarian. Solomon Dubno, I was not familiar with. He was a Polish Jewish poet, grammarian, biblical commentator, and maskil. And interestingly, he wrote a commentary for Moses Mendelssohn's translation of the Book of Breshit, and it was published in the first volume.
You're going to end up losing.
What'd you say? Oh, I thought you said something, Tamar. No. So, I thought it was interesting that in the first two paragraphs that she writes, she quotes three different scholars from three different centuries, three different continents, three different countries, and really exposes us to such a wide breadth. So she first quotes the Ibn Ezra, right? So the Ibn Ezra says, Hakrena lefanai, right? That grant me good fortune, send me good chance. He says that here its meaning is prepare me for what I desire, which I think is a really beautiful translation, right? To say, God, I need your help to find the thing that I'm looking for. I'm not sure, I didn't look up, I meant to, but time got away from me today, what this citation is of the Hakrei Hashem, this sort of formulation of this word, where it's similar, but I don't see it as a upshot of the text, but I think it is a very beautiful idea that as the Eved Abraham was sitting there, he was not really asking for chance, but he was like asking for some support when something might seem like chance, perhaps. So Solomon Debno's words are here. As a general rule, the term chance, mikra, is applied by the Torah to every situation befalling man, not directly brought about by deliberate intervention and effort. Nevertheless, all is ultimately prompted by divine providence, which mysteriously works in accordance with his hidden purposes. However, that which our moderns term pure coincidence, sorry, I think I spelled that wrong there, an occurrence which has no cause whatever cannot be found at all in the Bible, since such a thing has no existence but in our imagination as a result of our ignorance of real causes. So I think that this is what's really bothering Nechama Leibovitz, is not this idea of magical thinking, but this idea of like what happens when something feels like a coincidence, right? When something bad happens and we can't understand why it's happening. And so we're trying to understand it, and it's not right when really bad things happen that we don't understand. In some ways, I think there is a comfort to saying, well, we're not in control. That was just chance. That was bad luck, because then we don't have to confront a theological difficulty of a God that allows that thing to happen. And so again, I don't know when this was written, but I think that even if we apply it to today, right, this idea of pure coincidence is sometimes like a good comforting place of ignorance. Because then we don't have to think about a God that allows terrible things to happen. And I think that's bothering Nechama Leibovitz, and it bothers her that this idea that we might actually see a model of that in the Torah, because I think what she's saying is we have to confront the thing. Nothing happens without divine providence, and it's mysterious, right? We don't always understand it, even when it's hard. So that's just my own read. I'm not sure. And I welcome other people's thoughts there. So back to Nechama's commentary, she says, Abraham's servant entreated the Almighty as the prime mover behind all things to arrange that matters should work out in accordance with his desires. Admittedly, the course events did appear in the eyes of the ordinary mortals, blinded to the real cause as pure chance. But since God is the prime mover behind all things, there can, in the strict sense, be no such thing as chance. Right? So she's caught in this, it's like a difficult thing to ask, that things should work out as he wants in a way that appears like it's pure chance, but is not really pure chance, because maybe he knows that. And she brings us a really interesting example that she finds to be parallel from Shmuel Aleph. And so in Shmuel Aleph, she explains here that the Plishtim, the Philistines, had taken the Aron, the Ark of God, captive. And that they were doing so because they, in their minds, the way that they conceived of God or gods was that, like, if you controlled their location, you controlled their actions. And so, right, here you say the Philistines maintained that they could readily control the amount of mischief that he, capital He, could cause them by restoring to simple subterfuges. The ark could be sent to another city in order to stop the plague in their vicinity. So I think that's a super interesting idea, right? First of all, to say, like, if we can control where God is, then we can control the bad things that God does. And it's so human, right? I think I struggle with the way Nechama Leibovitz frames, Goyim versus Jews, as you'll see in a few minutes. But I think this idea that the Plishtim have is so real, right? Like when little kids close their eyes and then they think they're invisible, or you think if like you lock something scary in the closet, you won't have to confront it. To me, I could imagine being like the Plishtim in this way. But these efforts were of no avail, right? A deadly discomfiture reigned in all the cities of the police team, and they were forced with no alternative but to send it back home, right? They didn't want the Aron after so many bad things had happened, but they were still doubtful as to whether the ark was to blame for the troubles that had befallen them. Had not they been visited by plagues before the ark had arrived? And had not the moving of the ark had no effect on staying the plagues? And this to me is like COVID in the extreme, right? Trying to figure out like what causes a sickness and what removes it. And as soon as it gets better, you're like, well, was that really the thing that made it better? And so the police team came up with a plan in order to determine beyond all doubt the source of their discomfiture. They arranged, on the advice of their diviners, for the ark to be placed in a new cart. Sorry, I transcribed it myself. All errors are mine. Drawn by two milch kine, which I don't know where she is getting her translation from, but they're also translated as two milch cows here. The beasts of burden would provide the answer by the road they took. If it be asked, how could these cows, kine, be relied on as guides and oracles, it may be answered that these beasts of burden were not a whit inferior to the birds whose flight provided kings and princes in ancient times with omens influenced whose omens influenced their decision for peace or war. How are the cows to provide the plesium with the true answer to their question? So again, I think this is magical thinking in a lot of ways in its finest, right? If I shoot one more basket and I get it in, then I'm going to get an A on my test tomorrow, right? Or then I have to do this thing I don't want to do, or this thing I do want to do, right? I think there are like sort of lots of ways to conceive of it, but this idea that like something out of your control will give you control, right? They want to be in control of this plague that has come upon them. And the way that they can conceive of doing that is by saying that they'll know how it goes once once the cows choose which direction to take the ark home. So again, I actually like at this moment, I identify with the police team. I totally understand why they're doing what they're doing, even though when confronted with it, it is silly, right? How could we really think that the way the cows go is going to be a determinant of who caused the trouble? So she brings us the psukim, right, where they explain this. And they say right here, Uritem im derech gvulo ya'ale beit shemeshu, asa lanu et hara'ah hagadolah hazot. Right? If the cows go up the road to Beit Shemesh, to God's territory, then it was God who inflicted this terrible thing on us. V'im lo v'yadanu ki lo yadu naga banu mikrehu hayalanu. Right? That same word, mikre, it just happened to us by chance. We just were in the wrong place at the wrong time. This passage clearly mirrors the spiritual chasm, and this is the sentence that sort of makes me uncomfortable, right? Separating the heathen and Jewish outlooks. We here have a typical example of divination and sorcery. Here, Yechezkel Kaufman, I'm going to scroll down, so avert your eyes if it makes you nauseous. Here we go. He was a relatively modern thinker, wrote in the 1900s. He published the book that she is talking about, the Toldot HaEmunah HaYisraelit in 1960. And it seems like, I think interestingly, his main contribution was his thesis that Israel's monotheism was not a gradual development from paganism, but entirely new. That sort of seems to fit in. And his work was important because it offered a critical approach to the study of Tanakh without being the documentary hypothesis, which was really catching fire at that time. So he provides an interesting perspective. Again, one that is certainly not...
Rabbanit, what does that mean?
Sorry, say again?
What does that mean, that last sentence?
Oh, so the documentary hypothesis, right, which posits, I think, four authors to the Torah, right, the priests and some others that I learned in college and have since escaped me, right, J.P. I'd have to look it up. This was a wildly popular hypothesis in the 60s that was very, it was worrisome to a more traditional Tanakh studying group who wanted to posit that God had written the Torah. And so it seems like this professor, this philosopher and Bible scholar, Yechezkel Kaufman, offered another way to be critical, to like acknowledge the challenges that Wellhausen found without positing a different author to the Torah. so it was more traditional. It was like less offensive to a traditional audience like Nechama Leibovich, because it wasn't saying that people wrote the Torah, but it was still, it wasn't turning away from any problems, challenges or things that seemed to be sort of different in the Torah. He was able to be a Bible critic without crossing the line into the documentary hypothesis. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think, I went to a secular college. I went to the University of Maryland, and there was a speaker who came to campus who talked all about this, like that, people wanted their kids not to take Jewish studies Bible classes in the university because, they teach all these terrible ideas about people writing the Torah, when a lot of the Bible scholars in those departments are actually from Jews. They go to the Orthodox schools in their college towns or in their, cities. And that there has been found a middle way. And it seems like Yechezkel Kaufman was one of the people who allowed that to sort of start taking place. And he writes a lot about the difference between a Torah outlook and maybe I would say just a secular outlook instead of a heathen outlook. And so he says that divination constitutes a pseudoscientific or magical method enabling man to foretell the future and reveal mysteries. Right. And so again, this is like what I would call magical thinking. It's something that I like. I think it makes sense. And I do think that Judaism has a lot of places where we build that into our system in a lot of ways. Tashlich being, I think, a pretty good example. Simanim are another one, right? If I eat a fish head on Rosh Hashanah, I will be at the top instead of the bottom. It is a pure magical thinking move, but it seems to reinforce the other work we do, and it makes us feel more confident. But that is not Yechezkel Kaufman's view. He says it is idolatrous and an abomination to the Lord, since it is aimed at revealing divine secrets in an ungodly way. Right? We should just have ultimate bitachon. I think that is like the point that is getting driven home. We should just say nothing is by chance, nothing we do that's, a rally cap or lucky socks is going to make a difference. Everything is up to God. The idolater invokes omens and divination in one of the forms of heathen rebellion against God, the fruit of his pride and the confidence in his own powers and wisdom, the fruit of his aspiration to be as God. Right? It's hard for me to read this and like square it with my feelings about magical thinking, but I think this is a very valid, of course, way of thinking. This path is one of abomination and defilement, a vain hope, since God himself can bring to naught these idle omens. And when the time arrives, none of the devices of the diviners can save a man from the hands of God. The essence of the mantic, I'm sorry, there's a mistake there, idea is the subjection of the divine to a supra-divine experience. Faith in God, which is exclusive and omnipotent, cannot be harmonized with such a concept. There is a radical opposition between these two looks. And she goes on, right, to say that, right, even Balaam, who comes from this heathen world, and who was himself a diviner, a diviner, and who wished to blaspheme, admitted that there is no enchantment in Jacob. When Abraham's, that one I can fix, servant Eliezer resorted to was not an enchantment, but a psychological test to probe the character of the woman worthy to be the wife of Isaac and the ancestress of the nation chosen for its moral caliber. So I welcome other people's thoughts here. I think she's walking a very fine line, right? That he wasn't asking for an enchantment. He was asking like God to help him construct the test that would help prove that Rivka was the right one to be the wife of Yitzchak. I have trouble seeing it. I will be honest. I did not choose this because I necessarily liked it, but because I struggled with it. So I don't know. I definitely am curious what other people think. I don't know how to think about this piece here. I think that she's saying this is not a good thing, but because Eved Abraham said it, it must be good in this case. And it's a hard thing to square. But she goes on to explain a little bit more. She says, the heathen and the Jewish approach to the concept of chance is quite different. The Philistines did not say that if the ark does not go up by the way of its own border, that we shall know that it is Dagon that smote us, right? It's not, she's saying the Jewish approach would be to say like our God must have done it, right? If it wasn't their God, it must be our God. But rather, they say that it was just chance. And so in their eyes, then, there existed a power transcending their God. So I think that this is actually like the key sentence that I have trouble with, because I think the magical thinking is not about thinking that you're godlike, but it's about feeling control, which is like a good, healthy human emotion to feel. When I think I'm in control, I don't think that I have divine power. I still daven, right? Again, like you can't go to the test with just the magic socks and not do the work. You have to do both. And I think that that's actually what Eved Abraham is doing, right? He does the work. He concocts a plan. He tells the story of Abraham, but he also is asking for that sort of that magical thinking piece of it. I don't know. She quotes again from Yechezkel Kaufman, paganism does not acknowledge the absolute will of a divine being ruling all and the prime cause. It admits of a God that is supreme over all other gods, as well as a creator sustaining the order of the universe. But beyond this stands the primeval order of existence. Beyond the God, there are external forces independent of it. So now back to Nechama's own words. Since, therefore, heathen gods are not all-powerful, controlling all creation, there still exists the possibility of a chance, right? She's saying, well, of course, for the police team, it made sense to say either it was God or it was chance, because God is not in complete control. But how could someone who is Jewish, or even if Eved Abraham might not be Jewish, someone who is praying to the Jewish God, who is the owner of all things, then he couldn't possibly be asking for chance. And as Rashi says, Abraham's servant was someone who drank from the spiritual well of his master. He must have been well aware that what seemed but chance to a mortal man was only so because of his blindness. In reality, he knew that every chance had been so directed or engineered by divine providence, which was the prime cause of all things. Hence his paradoxical prayer, right? I think this is answering why he would daven to Hashem, but I don't understand why, right? If all chance is directed or engineered by divine providence, I'm not sure what Abraham's servant is asking for here. But then she gives a final example from the story of Yosef, right? Yosef, who had so many horrible things happen to him that many of them might have seemed like chance, right? Getting thrown into the pit by his brothers, being sold first to one group of travelers and then another group, going to Potiphar's house, right? Going to jail, being called out of jail because he interpreted a dream, right? And so all of these things might have caused, Yosef would have been the ultimate person to say, oh, I got a lot of good luck, right? But instead he says, "V'ata lo atem shlachtem oti hine ki ha'elokim." Right? It was not you, brothers, who sent me here, but God. All the normal factors in his life had conspired to prevent the realization of his dreams: his father's favoritism, his brother's hate, Potiphar's wife's jealousy. Yet it was these which had ultimately combined to facilitate their realization. Both coincidence and chance are in reality engineered by the hidden hand of providence. Right? Any semblance of power that we're trying to take in our life, however sillily expressed, it seems like Nechama Leibowitz is saying it's not real. We have to say it's not real, right? It has to be God's hand, hidden as it might be. And she leaves us with the words of the Ramban at the end of Bo. This is a beautiful piece of the puzzle just to finish out our tour of our commentaries, right? The Ramban first lived in Spain and then ultimately immigrated to Israel. Late 1100s, early 1200s, a leading Torah scholar, a posek, and also a mystic, right? Again, not really a combo that we often see these days. The Ramban's commentary on the Torah often critiques earlier commentaries and incorporates Kabbalistic teachings. The Ramban was a sharp commentary. He let you know when he thought you made a mistake. And he says at the end of Bo,
Even tells us when Rambam made a mistake.
That's right. Right. I mean, especially in his halachic works, he does not hold back. Yeah, it can be fun to read, but also, it's not the way that we speak, I think, about other, scholars these days. But he had a sharp tongue. And he says, from recognition of the large-scale historical miracles, man is led to acknowledge, sorry, again, all my mistakes, the hidden ones, which constitute the foundation of the whole Torah. For no man has any portion in the law of Moses, our teacher, until he is convinced that all our affairs and chance occurrences and the routine workings of the universe, both in private and public field, are miracles and not to be attributed merely to nature. Right. So when we see the splitting of the sea or the blood in the water or the hail and all the things, we should not be, Nachum Sarna, who is a scholar, a biblical scholar, writes about how the dam in the Nile causes the frogs to come out, which causes something else, right? Everything was sort of this like amazing chain of events that you could interpret as chance. I don't think that's what Nachum Sarna was saying. I think he was saying that's the miracle, right? The chance is the miracle. And what the Ramban is saying is don't even see that sort of chance occurrence or the routine workings, right? Call it a miracle. Call a thing what it is. And again, very strongly, no man or woman, of course, has any portion in the law of Moshe until he is convinced of this, right? You are not a Jew if you believe in chance. And it's very strong. And again, I can't figure out exactly what's bothering Nechama Leibovich. I certainly am not a good enough scholar of her work yet to know, but I have to believe that part of it is about seeing so many horrible things happening and having to square that with none of it being chance, with all of it being divine providence. And what kind of divine providence allows for the Holocaust? Or allows for a war that, brutally tears people apart, families apart. Certainly, I think we can look at the wreckage of October 7th and have that same question, right? We want there to be some kind of chance because otherwise it's very scary. And similarly, when we're faced with our divine judgment every year, we want to think that we can take some control. And that's why we eat the funny foods. And that's why we throw the bread in the water, because we want to say this is not, we can sort of cause a chance occurrence. We can change our luck. It makes us feel better about ourselves. And so I think that Nechama Leibovitz does not want that. She wants us to only see the hands of God, and I take great comfort in the other perspectives. But I think this is such a beautifully composed essay, drawing from so many different scholars from, parts of the Torah, parts of the Navi that it was really beautiful to learn together with you guys. But I welcome all thoughts, ideas, questions, anything that comes to mind. Stop the share here for a second so I can see everyone's face again.
Yeah, this is a fascinating topic. It really grabs me. And probably because, as you live life and accumulate more experiences and more information about various things, it's remarkable how often it turns out that what seems like chance or on the positive side, if it's something good, a miracle, the groundwork has been laid by human behavior, for good or bad. And I can think of a couple of instances that really affected my thinking. One was that a tsunami on the Asian coast. Have I talked about this context before?
Yeah.
A number of years back, where there was so much wreckage and so many people died. And because it happened so fast without warning, and people were just swept off their vacation beach, and drowned. Months later, I heard some small news account report that there had been a system of detection set up in the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, detecting seismic activity. And it was known 2 hours ahead of time that something was shaking up, and they could have predicted the tsunami. It's just that to be part of the communication system, the government in Thailand would have had to buy into this, subscribe to the service.
Mm.
And they didn't do it. Okay, well, not every government maybe would feel itself financially able to do that. But this is in Thailand, where the biggest news coming out of there at the time was about this hugely extravagant resort that was being built for the richest of rich travelers from all over the world. A wealthy man's playground. That's where the money was going to, and the government was supporting this. And I thought to myself, if that isn't a lesson in cause and
But see, I
effect
think
and
what you're doing,
consequence.
it's so interesting, Judith, right? And I've heard it in more extreme versions, right? I was in college when the tsunami struck, and I remember hearing some rabbi say that it was because of all of the avodah zarah that went on in Thailand,
Oh,
right? That
sure.
they
And there's similar
right
things
brought
in
it upon
Israel.
themselves, right? So you're ascribing it to like one kind of human error. That rabbi was ascribing it to a less tasteful human error, right? But I think that what that is like searching for a reason that the divine hand would cause that to happen. Because if we don't want to ascribe it to chance, then we have to say God caused it. And to say God caused it, we want to search for a reason because it's not satisfying to say God caused the tsunami for no reason, right?
Well, it's the only way human beings learn is when disaster befalls, and then we start figuring out what might have.
But it seems like what Nechama Leibovich is saying is we just have to have the ultimate bitachon, right? We just have to believe that this is the divine hand and this is the way that God wanted it. I think it's a hard lesson to internalize, but it does save us from rabbis who say that those people deserve to die from because they did avodah zarah, right? Like there is something to it, right? That we don't always understand it, but we can accept it's from God without concocting all kinds of terrible reasons for things.
I think that this kind of thinking is playing with theodicy, trying to
Yeah.
understand why do the good people suffer, and that goes. I like to go back to the book of Job. God will ask you, who are you to try to figure what I'm trying to do? Or
Yeah.
my favorite quote is from a Catholic theologian, St. Augustine. So you think you understand? If you understand, is not God. You can't.
Yeah.
I remember I have lost. I think this was one of the richest sessions we had with you, Yael, more than anywhere else. I agree with
It's
Judy.
all Nechama Leibovich. I just read it very nicely.
Well, no, but you bring it to life outstandingly. But I remember one lecture I attended by Rabbi Avi Weiss, in which he made a distinction between fate and destiny. Fate, more like in a Greek tragedy that Oedipus is born. Before he was born, his destiny, his fate was already written. He was going to kill his father, no matter what, even if all kinds of things to avoid that. And destiny is when man has agency to craft his own destiny or her own destiny. And there's some things we can avoid and some things we can't, with our agency, control. So another thought that I had was writing all these notes coming to me. Rabbi Sachs, in the introduction to the Koran Siddur, he says that when one prays, one should pray for not for what you want, because you may not be able to affect that, but pray for what to want. So to know what to want. And
that
so
feels a little like the Ibn Ezra, right?
Yeah.
I like that. That's Rabbi Sachs.
Rabbi Sachs. I can find this, give it the quote, the page.
That's beautiful.
Okay. But so one last thought that there's a new book coming out from Rabbi Itz Greenberg.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't get, it's called The Triumph of Life. He's 91 years old, and finally that's his magnum opus.
Yeah.
I found that there is several interviews or YouTubes interviewing him, and one of them is by Rabbi Josh Feigelson.
Yeah, our very own. He wrote his dissertation on Rav Yitz. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And it's very well done. And one of the things he says, it's so rich of information. knowledge. He says that God does not micromanage the world. God is not a helicopter parent. God, in biblical times, God used to interfere in history, like the Bible describes. But now God separated himself from us, and he allows us to do our own, take our destiny in our own hands, more or less parallel to what Avi Weiss said.
Yeah, and I think that it's all about that control, like that feeling of wanting to feel some control or that our actions matter in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As a doctor, very interested I think that the best example of magical thinking is the placebo effect, is when our suggestion, you are led to believe that we can do some things to ourselves by ourselves.
Yeah. Just by believing that it's medicine. That's a great one. The placebo, I like that.
In a way, though, that leads into the notion of prayer, where we put in front of our minds the ideal that we want to achieve and have the belief that we'll at least be on the right path to achieving it if we can keep that vision alive. And I think that's essential to Judaism.
Yeah.
We look beyond what is to what we think should be. But I just wanted to add another footnote to what I said before about finding context for miracles in some pattern of antecedents and consequences. I think human beings are always trying to find ways to avoid being responsible, taking responsibility for the consequence, for outcomes, no matter what they are. And even, I mean, saying it's because of Avodah Zarah, or even me saying it's because the government didn't pay attention to the scientists who were setting up detection systems. It's a way of putting the blame on the other guy rather than focusing on the fact that we're all connected. And when something happens that everyone disapproves of, we're all responsible. And we have to look for the smaller patterns of cause and effect to see how to change it rather than keep looking for blame, who to blame.
You don't have to go very far. In October 7, the government was receiving information that something like October 7 will happen. And there was some, like the Thailand government, they didn't do anything. And
Well, and they didn't do anything because they didn't think that the offenders were smart enough to actually pull it off. That was said. Not only that, it's not the first time. Our congregational military historians, did you hear the lecture by Doug Klein and I forget who the other person was? This has happened before in one of the previous wars in Israel. They didn't think that the information was going to be enough for the perpetrators to actually succeed.
The 7th
The Yom Kippur War.
Yeah, yeah.
In 67, they went ahead and they did what they had to do. In 73, they didn't.
Right.
In 23, forget it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, for sure, right? Bitachon only goes so far. You have to have some control. I think maybe that's where our difference lies, perhaps with Nechama Leibovich is saying, she wants to say, like, you've done something, and right, divine control is the result of your actions, as opposed to, it seems like a third option. There's your actions, there's bitachon, and then there's chance, right? This sort of uncontrollable thing in the middle that feels like a contradiction to belief in divine oversight, right? I like that idea that God is not a micromanager, right? That feels very in contrast to Nechama Leibovich's view here. Yeah, I think there's a lot to think about, and certainly she speaks from far more authority and power than I do. And I think that just the world has changed in a lot of ways. I think there was no Rav Yitzhak Greenberg saying that, there was no magical thinking yet. as I often wish, I wish that I could like write, send in my Gillion to her and have her, correct it, because I would be so curious what she would think about magical thinking. But
Well,
thank you for this.
You can write your own.
Thank you for this enriching discussion. It was such a wonderful topic to conquer together. And I hope everyone has a good week. If you are in the Chicago area and you would like to come to the new winter Beit Midrash, our Cheshvan Beit Midrash was a big success. We are looking forward to it. There's an amazing lineup of mostly female speakers this time. Our new member, Lizzie Martin, who is a graduate of Nishmat and who is visiting us from Israel for a year or two. And Amanda Goldstein, who is in the Maharat program, is teaching the second one. Dr. Jane Shapiro is teaching the third one. And Rabbi Josh Feigelson will be teaching the final one. So it's an excellent series. You can sign up for a chavruta on our website, and I think it will be amazing.
When is it beginning? Next week?
It's Mondays in December, the first 4 Mondays in December.
Oh, okay.
2nd, 9th. But we do ask that you fill out your chavruta form before Thanksgiving so that we can match you up with a chavruta. And that is in person, sadly, for some, happily for others.
Is there a link or a in the website somewhere? Or?
Yes, hold on. I could actually give you the link. That would be very efficient. 1 second. I just had it up here. Find it again. And here it is. And otherwise, I don't think this is a kind of nice and slow week. Here is the link to sign up. And I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Hope everyone has a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom. And I'll see you then. And this is the link for any week, Cynthia and Glorianne. So you're welcome to join us anytime. All right, see you soon.
Thank you. Well
Yeah.
done.